Hey guys, I'm Dave, and welcome to the Trull Gallery. Today we're going to make a jig to cut dovetail keys from mitered boxes. I'm currently working on a project that's basically a box with mitered corners. And miters are a notoriously weak joint, and they usually need something to strengthen them. When I built this box a few months ago, I strengthened the miters with some basic splines. For the project I'm working on now, I wanted something with a little more flash. And I remembered a jig I had years ago and decided it was time to rebuild it. Let me show you how I assembled that jig, how to use it, and what the final joint looks like. Let's take a look. I started with some 3/4 inch Baltic birch plywood and cut 4 pieces at roughly 12 inches by 5 inches at the table saw. I glued 2 pieces together and pinned the corners with some 23 gauge pins to hold them in line. The pins are out near the edges, so they shouldn't be near any saw curves later. I glued and pinned the second set. Then I glued and clamped the 2 pairs together, doing my best to keep the edges lined up. Once the glue dried, I realized my blank was too thick to make the 45-degree cut I needed. I could have started over, but I just ripped off one section of the plywood and planed it smooth. I laid out the center line for the cut on my blank, set my table saw blade to 45 degrees, and slowly cut that blank in 2. I'll need some end pieces to lock things together, so I ripped 2 strips of 1/4 inch ply to about 2 inches wide. At the miter saw, I cut them to the length of the 2 halves of my jig, or about 6 5/8 of an inch long. A little more glue and a few more pins, and the end caps were attached to the 2 halves of the jig. My table saw fence acted like a stop to keep them in line, and I made sure the bottom of the miters were touching. I flipped the jig around, added the second side, and then wiped off any excess glue before setting it in clamps for a while. Once the glue was dry, I went back to the table saw to make some relief cuts. This step isn't necessary, but it does take some of the stress off your router bit in the next step. I took 2 passes in each location that I planned to use for my keyway. In this case, 1 inch down from the inside of the jig, and another centered on the box I was making. I planned on using a 1/2 inch diameter dovetail bit, so I laid out the locations on my jig with a bit more precision. I set my bit height at 9/16 to get a full depth keyway without cutting into the inside of my box. Then I set my fence until the lines on my jig were lined up with the bit, or at least as close as I could manage. The first pass is just to cut the opening in the jig. Here you can see how the relief cut helps the bit move through all that plywood. While the fence is in place, I make the actual cuts in the box. The jig holds the box at 45 degrees from the table, and the end of the jig registers the box in the correct location. I cut the top dovetails first, and then I flip the box around and cut the bottom dovetails in the same location for symmetry. Since this box has an open front, I only cut the dovetails on the backside. With those 4 cuts made, I could adjust the fence and repeat for the center dovetails. Then I made the clearance pass, and then the cuts through the box. This left me with 6 perfect dovetail slots on my miter joints. Without moving the router bit height, I adjusted the fence and grabbed some contrasting stock I had milled up for the keys. Since the widest point of my dovetail is 1/2 inch, I milled a piece of maple to 5/8. If you cut your stock too thin, it makes getting a correct fit a bit of a challenge. I made several small adjustments to the fence before I got the fit just right. Run one face against the fence, flip your stock around, and run the second face. Remember that each adjustment of the fence will remove stock from both faces, so as you get closer to your fit, make those adjustments carefully. You want the key to slide the dovetail snugly, but without too much force. Things will get too tricky if it's too tight before you even add glue. Once I got the fit just right, I ripped off the excess with the table saw. Then I took that strip over to the bandsaw and cut 6 keys. Make sure that your keys are longer than the slots. It's better to have excess than to find out that your key is too short once you've added glue. Now you can add a bit of glue to the key and tap it into the keyway. It may take a bit of wiggling to get things lined up, but if you work carefully, things will slide together nicely. This is a good time to make sure that your key is overhanging both sides of your box. I prefer to let the glue dry before trimming off the excess. I think it keeps my flush cutting saw teeth cleaner. Placing a card under the saw minimizes the chances that your saw will dip into the side of the box. Or if it does, the scratches would be minor. Trust me, I've made this mistake before. After trimming all of the excess from one side, turn your box and trim off the other side. Just don't rush these cuts. You don't want the key to break off, leaving tear out in your nearly completed project. A little sanding will clean up the rest of your key stock, and your project is ready for finish. This jig is easy to make and simple to use. And it's the same design that I used to cut the splines on this box. As a matter of fact, you can use the same jig to cut splines or the dovetails, because the jig is just there to support your stock. It doesn't care what shape the cutter is that's going through it. Try it out next time you're making a mitered box to see how easy it is to strengthen those miters with a little flair. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this video. Is there something I could have done differently? Easier, smarter, safer? Drop them in the comments below. I'd love to hear. As usual, I've added some links to the tools and equipment I've used in this video and around the shop, and some of them have affiliate links. So if you need to purchase one of those and use that link, it does help support this channel. If you enjoyed this video, maybe give us a thumbs up and share it with friends. If you haven't already, maybe it's time to hit that subscribe button and the little bell so you get notified each time I put out a new video. This time I know it's coming up next. So if you'd like to find out how I built this box and what the heck it's for, you'll have to stand by. This should be coming out soon. But until then, have a great day, stay safe, we'll see you soon.